Hey there, it's John from Heroes and Legends, and this is the Monday after the first weekend of Eldritch Moon being playable in Standard. So we're going to take a look at some of the hot cards that really made an impact over the weekend in Standard. Now, obviously a lot's going to change over the next couple of weeks as players digest the information from this first weekend and bring it closer to the Pro Tour, and then of course when the Pro Tour occurs, everything could potentially change. But at least for right now, I just want to do a quick top 10 list and talk about some of the cards that had the biggest impact. Now, if you watched any coverage this weekend, Star City Games Open, for example, you know that Bant Company was kind of the name of the game. That was the big deck of the weekend, but of course, like I said, a lot can change. Now, aside from that, we did see a lot of other interesting builds. Now, humans were still a thing, obviously, as you probably could have guessed, but outside of Bant colors even, we did see things like Delirium deck, which was very interesting. We saw Seasons Past kind of make a comeback with a new build. We saw Spirits, which was a different tribe. We saw Angels, and we even saw some Emerge decks. So there was a lot of variety going on in the top 64, even if a lot of the top decks happen to be Bant Company. So having said that, let's look at first the honorable mentions. Now, Summary Dismissal actually was very impressive to me this weekend. Now, it usually came out of the sideboard, but I saw this card show up in various places, even humans decks, sometimes Bant decks, even saw it in Spirit decks. So it shows up in a lot of different places. Obviously, blue being one of the Bant colors, it's going to definitely see play going forward in Standard. And like I said, there were Emerge decks. This was a great sideboard card against those. Scour the Laboratory. This one maybe surprised me a little bit. You didn't see a lot of copies of this floating around, but it was very successful when it was used. For example, there was a Sultai control deck which came in second place in Star City Games Open this weekend, and it really dealt with all of those Bant Company decks rather well. This card was part of it and was actually kind of an engine to help your card draw. It looked a little bit like Treasure Cruise, obviously not as strong, but it was still a very good card for that build. Tamio Field Researcher. Now, she didn't show up in all the Bant builds, but there were some Bant builds running her, and I do think they were a little better off for it in most cases. I think the concern being she might be a little difficult to cast, but once she was on the battlefield, she did make a big impression. I expect to see more copies of her in the coming weeks. And finally, Emrakul actually made a pretty decent sized splash, I would say, showing up in a few different places, the Sultai control deck being the most notable, but there are also some ramp decks out there that were playing Emrakul, and I actually did see on coverage this weekend somebody hard cast Emrakul, so it is possible, and I think we'll see more of it in the next few weeks. So let's move on to number 10, and that's Blessed Alliance. Now, this is a very cheap, affordable, uncommon at 40 cents right now, but this did play a role in Bant Company decks. Not a huge role necessarily. Not all of them are running this. Some are running one-ofs, and it will be interesting to see how successful the players felt this card was who actually ran it this weekend, to see if we're going to see more or less copies next weekend. But I wanted to at least get this one on number 10 just because I do think it does have a lot of potential in a few different places. Coming in number 9 is Bruna the Fading Light. So like I mentioned earlier, there was an Angel deck, and it does use Bruna and Casella. It was actually very fun to watch. I actually did see them meld on camera at one point. That was pretty awesome. So yeah, this could potentially be a thing. Again, it's just going to depend how the metagame goes. Now, Bruna is usually a 1 or 2 of in these style of decks, and you'll see why in just a moment. But right now, very affordable. You can pick up Bruna for $1.75 at this point. Number 8 is Thalia's Lancers. Now, this is why you don't necessarily need 4 copies of Bruna and or Casella in some of your decks, because this will help you search for the one you need, and that's basically what the Angel decks were doing. This could definitely be a part of those decks going forward in the future, and it's only 83 cents. Prior to seeing last weekend, I wasn't sure if this would see a lot of play because I felt like, well, if I'm going to pay $5, I could just cast Avacyn. However, there is a place for this in certain decks. Number 7 is Casella the Broken Blade. Now, this one's a little more pricey, obviously. It's a mythic rare. She's already running about $21. But the interesting part about her is, yes, she's part of that Angel deck, but she also showed up in a whole bunch of other places, as you could probably imagine. Some Bant decks, but really this was showing up more in like humans decks and other tribal decks, even like Spirit decks, stuff like that. If you could just shoehorn her in at the 4 slot, she was going in just because she was that good of a card. It'll be interesting to see how much play she sees going forward, but I do think she's going to be showing up in a lot of different archetypes. Number 6 is Murder, and I included this one at number 6. Again, it's another cheap card. It is a reprint, pretty easy to get a hold of, only 44 cents here. But this saw play in the Sultai Control deck, and it didn't have a whole bunch of copies. I think it was only a one of, quite honestly. But the reason I put it so high on the list is because so many times over the course of the weekend, I felt like players wanted to have Murder in their deck, and instead they had a cheaper, more conditional removal spell. I feel like next weekend we're going to see a lot more of this card. So I could be wrong. I'm speculating a little bit on this one. Maybe number 6 is a little too high, but I think this card is really going to awaken next week. Coming at number 5, Ishkana Graft Widow. I didn't see this one coming, I'll be honest. I thought, wow, this is a cool commander card. I really didn't see this getting play in Standard, but it actually got a fair amount of play in a couple different decks. There was a Delirium deck, which obviously would make sense, but there's also a Seasons Past deck that's running this as well. It's pretty cool. I love seeing in action. The ability to have your opponent lose life was very, very relevant in a number of matchups that I saw on camera. This is actually pretty cool that it got there. I hope it continues to stick around. Right now it has about a $9 price tag, so still relatively affordable too. Coming in number 4 is Liliana, the Last Hope. Now, she's running about $27.80, so a little pricey right now, but she is seeing play. Now, the thing with Liliana is she's not being seen in like 4-ofs or anything like that, but she is showing up sometimes 2 or 3 copies in these Delirium and or Season Pass decks. I was a little surprised we didn't see any zombie decks do very well in the tournament, so maybe in coming weeks that will be added to the archetypes that she's relevant in, and if that's the case, she's going to continue to stay hot. But even if that doesn't happen, she's going to see a fair amount of play, and she did very, very well last weekend and showed very well on camera, which makes me feel like we're going to see more copies of her in the progressive weeks. I know this was a card that underwhelmed some, but I do think for 3 mana you get a lot of value out of this card. Coming at number 3, Thalia, Heretic Cathar. Now you're going to notice with these top 3 cards, these are all cards that were played in Bant Company decks, but in many cases there were cards that crossed over into other decks as well. So for example, Thalia here crossed over into Humans decks very, very easily. This is a great card for both of those decks, and right now I think this is actually very reasonably priced at $6.75, so if you're looking to get copies, this might be a good time to do so. Coming at number 2, Selfless Spirit, and this is only $2.99, but this is another one I would definitely jump on now because I think this is going to go up pretty quickly as the next couple weeks unfold. Now, I haven't talked a whole lot about the Spirit deck, but it was out there and it did pretty good this weekend. But what was interesting about this card is not only was it good in that Spirit deck, but it was good in Bant Company, which was the overwhelming deck this weekend when you look at the top spots. And finally, number 1, the big card of the weekend, and I think for many weekends to come, is Spell Queller. This thing already costs about $12.43. Now, luckily, this is a rare, not a mythic, so hopefully the price won't get too crazy. But I think after this weekend, a lot of folks are going to be out there trying to get copies for their decks. This was awesome in Bant. Also showed up in Spirit decks, even showed up in Humans decks. It was just kind of everywhere you could fit it in. The big play of the weekend, I think, was casting a Reflector Mage, bouncing a creature, and then a turn later when they go to play it, spell quelling it. It was just nuts. And we saw a lot of that, and that was really the engine I think that made the Bant Company deck great. Obviously Eclectic Company, very, very strong card, but I think Reflector Mage and Spell Queller really took a good deck and just took it just over the top to very dominating this weekend. So having said that, that's a look at the first weekend's hot cards for Standard. Now, like I said, things will change a lot over the next few weeks. I'm looking forward to see what happens next week, and then as we move into the Pro Tour a few weeks down the road. So until then, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day.
Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality videos for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a good day.